Ranking Member Jordan, members of this committee, thank you for inviting Secretary Kerry and me to testify today about the threats posed by climate change to our national security. I'm proud to be sitting next to my friend and former Senate and Cabinet colleague John Kerry. He's been a longtime leader on this issue and understands it very well. John and I have shared many conversations about climate change over many years. We are both founding members of the American Security Project, an organization that has led to research into the national security implications of climate change. In my public career, both in the Senate, at the Department of Defense, and as co-chairing the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, preparing for climate change was an important part of my work. In 1997, the Senate passed the Byrd-Hagel resolution, which laid out the conditions for Senate support for an international agreement on carbon emissions. The Senator Byrd referred to in the Byrd-Hagel resolution was Senator Robert Byrd, the late Senator Robert Byrd of coal-producing West Virginia, who took this issue very seriously. Later that year, I led the Senate delegation to the protocol negotiations in Kyoto, where Secretary Kerry was also a member of the delegation. In 2007, I led the effort to require a national intelligence assessment of security impacts of climate change. As Secretary of Defense, I issued the Department's first Arctic strategy in 2013, highlighting how the military would respond to melting ice and other challenges, as well as the Department's first climate adaptation roadmap, detailing how to prepare for climate change. I supported the 2015 Paris Peace Climate Agreement that Secretary Kerry negotiated because it met the requirements of the Byrd-Hagel resolution, ensuring that all nations take measurable, reportable, and verifiable steps to reduce emissions. While climate science readily and rapidly advanced over my decades in public service, my priorities remain the same. Any actions to address climate change must protect America's economy, our environment, and our national security. My views were always informed by science. As scientists reduced uncertainty about climate change over the last 2 decades, it became clear, very clear, that the U.S. must implement policies to address the challenge, prepare, because climate change is threatening our economy, our environment, and our national security. Dating back to the George H.W. Bush administration in 1992, as Secretary Kerry has noted and Chairman Cummings has noted, intelligence and national security professionals were telling us that climate change posed a direct threat to U.S. national security. This is 1992. This work has been informed by U.S. scientists telling us that a melting Arctic, more frequent droughts and floods, and extreme weather are all examples of the changing climate in the United States and the world. Changing weather patterns threaten our national security through its impacts on military infrastructure, readiness, disaster response, and the economy. We now don't need to wait for more sophisticated climate models to project the security consequences of climate change. We know what they are. The impacts of climate change are clearly evident today. As members of this committee know so well, this past year's extreme weather has seriously affected our military readiness. In September, Hurricane Florence decimated Camp Lejeune and caused damage to Fort Bragg and military installations across North Carolina, as Congressman Meadows knows so well. A few weeks later, Hurricane Michael leveled Tyndall Air Force Base on Florida's Panhandle, causing damage to 17 expensive F-22s and major structural damage throughout that base. Last month, floods in my home state of Nebraska, as Chairman Cummings noted, severely damaged the runway and infrastructure at Offutt Air Force Base, home of U.S. Strategic Command. As a Nebraskan, spring floods are no surprise. However, these floods were the most extreme ever. Extreme. More extreme than anything we've seen. We saw record-setting flooding along the Missouri, Platte, and Elkhorn rivers and across the Midwest. Estimates of the cost of these disasters to the military are significant. The Marines have requested $3.6 billion to rebuild North Carolina, while the Air Force has requested an initial $5 billion for Tyndall and Offutt. While the bases may rebuild over time and with money, the loss of training and readiness cannot be recovered. In a February letter to the Secretary of the Navy, General Neller, Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps, wrote that because of the damage from the storms, the combat readiness of Marine Expeditionary Force, one-third of the entire combat power of the Marine Corps has been degraded and will continue to degrade. That's a powerful statement coming from the Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps. I'll close by addressing the proposal, or as we know, a proposal that may be forthcoming from the White House to question the science behind the national security estimate on climate change. We still do not know the details of what the proposal before the National Security Council would do. I noticed this morning in the Washington Post there was a significant story about that issue. Press reports have indicated that National Security Advisor Bolton wants to create a panel that would re-examine whether climate change is needed and a threat to national security, that climate change is indeed a threat to national security. If this panel were created in good faith, transparent, open, under the legal requirements of a federal advisory committee, I'm confident that the weight of scientific evidence and present-day realities would confirm what I and other national security leaders have found. Climate change is a real and present threat to our national security, which most likely will get worse. There needs to be a dedicated effort to address this threat. And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jordan, I appreciate very much you bringing this committee together on this subject, because it is only through the committee work in the Congress will we forge a bipartisan consensus to move forward and prepare for what we know is impending and is real. This year, the Pentagon delivered a congressionally mandated report on the vulnerability of our military installations. The report found that 67% of the installations assessed currently face threats from flooding. 67%. 54% currently face threats from drought, and 46% face threats from wildfires. Those percentages jump higher when future vulnerabilities, not just current, but future vulnerabilities, are taken into consideration. Unfortunately, this administration failed to comply with congressional requirements. The report left out the Marine Corps entirely and ignored the requirement to provide an overview of action necessary to ensure resiliency. It did not include any cost estimates. While the initial report remains a valuable first step, the failure to complete the assessment and provide future mitigation plans will severely inhibit future readiness. I signed a letter along with Secretary Kerry and 56 other senior national security officials asking that the President not dispute and undermine military and intelligent judgments on climate change. And I ask that a copy of that letter be included in the record. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jordan, and this committee, again, I thank you for this opportunity and for your attention to this serious matter, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much to both of you, and thank you for recognizing the pain and turning it into a passion to do your purpose. And I think that when we are dancing with the angels, future generations will benefit from your work. Secretary Kerry and Secretary Hagel, in February, there were a number of press reports regarding a White House memo showing that the President may be seeking to create a committee within the NSC to challenge previous government reports on the dangers of climate change. The memo specifically challenges the finding that climate change